So welcome to Inside Football, Sports, and New Media. I'm Keith Kelly, an associate at Shepherd Mullen, and currently the vice chair of the Beverly Hills Bar Association's Entertainment Law section. And I have the pleasure of moderating today's discussion. We'll save some time at the end for questions, so please drop them in the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as possible. Now, I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers, Zach Swartz and Jennifer Yuen. Starting with Zach, who is a vice president of business and legal affairs at Skydance Sports, where he works across scripted and unscripted sports projects. His work includes high-profile documentaries and scripted projects, including America's Team, The Gambler and His Cowboys for Netflix, NFL Draft, The Pick is In for Roku, the untitled NFL Dan Fogelman Project for Hulu, and Air for Amazon. Over the past 10 years, he's been with Skydance. He's contributed across a broad range of initiatives, thriving on the dynamic, fast-paced environment and the opportunity to support the growth and development of Skydance's key business divisions, including Skydance Television and Skydance Animation. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Next is Jennifer Yuen, who is the first in-house attorney at Omaha Productions, an entertainment company founded by Peyton Manning and Jamie Horowitz. Jennifer's responsibilities include overseeing production, legal, and negotiating and drafting agreements for scripted and unscripted programming, live events, and brand partnerships. Prior to her current role, Jennifer was a business and legal affairs executive at G4 TV and Yuen. Jennifer began her career at a boutique law firm whose clients included sports federations, production companies, and above-the-line talent. She's also represented Olympic athletes in anti-doping disputes before the Court of Arbitration for Sport. She's a former competitive figure skater and received her JD from Southwestern Law School. Thank you for being here, Jennifer.
Thank you for having me.
So we have a great group of people here to talk. I wanted to first give each person a chance to talk about your company. We have a lot of law school students and recent law grads who join these. So if you could also provide a little bit of an overview of how you've gotten to your current role. We'll start with you, Jen, in Omaha Productions.
Yeah, so as Keith mentioned, Omaha Productions was founded by Peyton Manning and Jamie Horowitz, and we're really a company that exists in our niche of like making sports content that makes people happy. I think a lot of us could use a little happiness and something a little uplifting. And our goal is to really try and provide that. We're known for the Manning Cast, which is an alternate telecast to Monday Night Football. Also have got Quarterback on Netflix. And we are getting ready to do our first scripted project with Hulu, Chad Powers' TV show, coming at the end of September. In terms of my path to this role, it's really been a circuitous one. I had a lot of variety doing a lot of different things. I started at the front office of a pro-am boxing team. And that really gave me, at the time it was, hey, I've got a job and it's about economy, but really the experience I got there in terms of, being involved on the ground with the physical production of live boxing matches, it's been really helpful throughout the rest of my career. And then after that, through the boutique law firm, I got a lot of experience working with startups, entertainment production companies, and, getting the chance to see new technologies and new medias as they were emerging. For a while, I was at Jash, and that channel was a YouTube channel that was launched when Google bought YouTube, and they funded a bunch of channels, and ours was one of them. And so really just one of the first companies out there doing more long form content on YouTube back in 2013. And then also through, G4 TV, it was esports, relaunching this network and live streaming on Twitch and YouTube 20 hours a week, experimenting with that. And so I think all of that really, in the end, as I was going through it, it felt sort of very scattered. But along the way with each job, I learned a lot, and that kind of informed where sort of I wanted to go next. What I wanted to do in sports when I graduated law school is very different from where I've ended up. And a lot of that is because of what I've learned along the way with all of the work that I've done, whether that's with the network or, anti-doping arbitrations. And it's really, you never know what is going to prove useful, to your current job. And, I think that's one of the fun things about, what I do and where I'm at now.
Thanks for that.
So for Skydance, which has been a lot in the news a lot lately, I started at Skydance. Skydance started with David Ellison. The story is in an airplane hangar, and built it out. Started with features, then television, and then video games, and then animation, and then sports, and then horror movies, and then the acquisition of Paramount. And so it's kind of been a bit of a rapid acceleration, and I was lucky enough that I got to start my career at Skydance. In February, it will be 10 years, how long I've been at Skydance. And I got there by applying to an endless amount of jobs after law school and trying to get lunches with as many lawyers as possible with the hope of finding a lawyer that knows someone who I'm applying for a job for. And I got lucky enough that that happened. The person that was interviewing me had actually thrown away my resume, which I think is always I always like mentioning that, in no small part because I got the emails that they exchanged back and forth, because ultimately I became that lawyer's assistant, the one that the outside lawyer got me connected with. And the reason I had to go the assistant route was because every law firm I was applying to said, "Oh, well, you need years of law firm experience first." And I had decided early in my career that wasn't really the approach I wanted to make, and I had the grades to match that approach that I wanted to take. And so I needed to go in-house was kind of the goal. Um, what I've seen since I've come up is I started as an assistant, worked my way up quickly. I think at the time when I was hired at Skydance, there were 40-ish, 45-ish employees, much smaller company at that point. And I just kind of filled in the blanks. When there were opportunities where we were growing an animation division, I said, I'll help. What do you need? And then they just told me things to do, and I jumped in on it, did story artist deals, animation director, animation writer deals, while simultaneously doing scripted television. That continued for a number of years, but I was always primarily scripted television until I think 2021 when Skydance, I inadvertently discovered Skydance Sports was getting created and kind of put my name into the running for it, moonlit for them for a bit while doing scripted, and then eventually came on full time where I've been for the last, I guess, 4 years. I don't remember if it was 21 or 22, to be honest. But our first big thing on the scene was the movie Air, which accelerated from development to production so fast. The rights deal was closed, I think, 3 days before production started. So it was a very much not how that works. And so sports was off. And shortly after that, Skydance Sports joined forces with the NFL, the National Football League, which led to a joint venture, which is what it's still the same company. And we were co-owned by the NFL. And so for the last few years, we've been partners with them and working with them to bring kind of more Hollywood energy to the famous league that doesn't necessarily have that. And so that's where I'm at currently. As to the whole Paramount of it all, I will not be able to answer any questions or anything on that, just getting ahead of that. But that's where it currently is. And so I'm excited to see what's next.
Thanks. So both of these companies are very active in this space, but sort of to set the stage as to the type of programming that we're going to be talking about today, maybe Jen, can you talk about what type of sports programming we're going to discuss and what we're not going to discuss?
Well, I think we're not going to discuss live sports programming, I think, because that's very much the traditional model that we're used to. And at the risk of speaking for Zach, I think both of us exist in a world where, that's not what we're doing. And, we're in this growing space and trying to figure out, what's next. And part of what we're seeing and what we're doing is a lot of the unscripted behind the scenes type programming. So, single documentaries, docuseries, alternate telecasts and that sort of thing. And, you know, and maybe even scripted, who knows, right? The sports world, I think, is both in good and bad ways. The world is our oyster in terms of, you know, what sort of programming we can, you know, get out there that's outside of the traditional like live broadcast, or something that's more of an investigation or journalistic in nature.
Yeah, it's bringing it more to the entertainment world kind of thing. And I think the sports talk shows kind of foreshadowed all of this happening. You have your Stephen A. Smith shows where it's like it extended into Twitter. Everyone wants to know what's behind the curtain and things like that. But it's even kind of, I think, changed beyond that a bit more too, because athletes are more entertainers now. There's more that kind of gray area where I think that's where we are kind of at and where the market will probably be shortly. Um, I think we're hitting on those kinds of things as well, just all of what sports entertainment looks like. That's not live sports.
Other than Manningcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So there's been a big boom in this type of programming, I think, following Drive to Survive and The Last Dance. Can you talk about sort of the market trends, the reasons for the drivers of growth, and maybe what you see coming next?
Well, I think anecdotally, just really based on my personal experience, I see, you know, that's people want to go behind the scenes with the athletes. And I think if you really look back at the trends in the market just beyond content programming, right? Like with the social media and the Instagram and the TikTok, right? That gave athletes a chance to like take you behind the curtain, and people follow these athletes because they're like, oh, I want to see the snapshots of your life. I want to see, you know, what you're doing in your day, and they're posting Instagram stories and kind of developing those relationships. And so that opened up this world for athletes on these platforms to realize like, hey, you know, that's a way for me to develop my own personal brand and get sort of endorsement deals. And then, you know, where things are changing is something like Omaha Productions. You know, we can come in and sort of take that to the next level, right? There's a series like Quarterback where, you know, you're sort of, like Zach said earlier, we're bringing the Hollywood to it of, hey, you know, you guys love to take fans behind the scenes, give them a sneak peek into your life, and, you know, we'll help you be a part of this and put it together into a show that, you know, will entertain people and will give fans that sort of behind the scenes access in this very sort of packaged, more sophisticated show format. Um, and so I think it's, you know, an advantage to production companies in a tough market, to be honest, right? With how much it costs to produce content. Relative to traditional content, it is a little bit less in cost. And then it also gives athletes a chance to sort of build their personal brand. And a lot of them are frankly looking to do that these days.
Well, and a lot of this, I think, is because I know when Skydance came on the scene, it was premium. We describe all of our unscripted stuff as premium, and it's making it a higher quality than what an athlete with a camera behind them could do, right? And I think Omaha and Skydance are both looking at the same kind of thing from different sides, where it's like just elevating it. What can we do to take it to another level of follow docs or behind the scenes? Because as Jen mentioned, you can see TikToks and Instagram lives and things to see behind the curtain for them, but what does it look like when it's well put together and not just like a live feed kind of thing? And part of the reason Skydance Sports, sorry, internally we're just sports. Skydance Sports is it's that the budgets for unscripted have increased for what sports docs are now versus 7, 8 years ago, kind of thing, where you can make it more than just a small camera crew and an editing bay. You can add a little bit of pizzazz to it and like more dynamic editing kind of thing. And I think you guys did a great job with that with WWE Unreal, right? Where that was, I've watched wrestling my entire life, and seeing it like that and the way that it's shot and the way that it's edited, it's like, okay, cool. This is not how WWE does it, which is usually their filter. It's a different set of views. It's more of an artistic kind of take on it.
Yeah, so can we sort of set the stage as to who the key stakeholders are for this type of programming, and any unique issues that come up in deal making with these individuals or entities as opposed to other more traditional unscripted programming?
Yeah, I think the big part of it is the leagues and the athletes, where with unscripted, you're often dealing with massive casting calls where you vet through tons of contestants. You've tried to find people that would make good TV. In this, it's a little bit more you want to find athletes that can be good TV. So you already have that qualifier. And then when you're negotiating or talking with athletes, you have to be just like actors, you have to be very careful with how you phrase things and the way that you put value on stuff. A big part of that, and we'll talk more about this later, is the difference between what their value is on the field and what their value is in a documentary, where the documentary's budget might be a tenth of what they make in a year. And so I've had more than once someone say, "Oh, well, he's made more than that, or she's made more than that, giving a talk at a conference." I was like, "Great, this isn't that. Like, this is kind of that's not this business model. We're not a small company that's going to pay $2 to $3 million for you to talk for 30 minutes. It's more than that." And so you kind of have to play, it's not necessarily playing to the ego, but it's playing more in that space. It's figuring out that balance between how you would normally talk about an actor and how you would talk about someone that isn't in the entertainment industry per se. And then with leagues, it's kind of the same thing. I've had the conversation, well, why would we take that risk? Why would we do that? And my answer is, you need to answer that. You're right. We're not giving your league enough money that it's going to change things, but this is something you are interested, or some people in your company are interested, right? And because we're on the legal side, we're not trying to sell people on what we're doing. We're trying to close a deal for what it is. And I think those two pillars are really the hardest part, is kind of bringing them into the Hollywood aspect and what is traditional. And we'll hit more on like the specific legal situations of that later. But I think those two in particular are the big difficult thing. Jen, what about you? What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think very, very similar, sort of helping them understand, right, that a league's market value in terms of what it presents with live sports programming can be very different and much riskier to them in an unscripted space. And, as Zach mentioned, we're trying to close the deal, but, before that, it's really setting the table and helping everybody understand, what type of show are we trying to make here, and what does everybody want to get out of it, and thinking about it long term, reaching a different audience, right? So a football player that you see playing a game on your screen throughout, on TV throughout the season, how you view them and sort of what their value as talent is going to be very different than, if you get a more up close and personal look at them. And, it's more about not just, what they do on the field, but, what is their personality off the field, and what sort of story do they have to tell there?
And getting them comfortable with it. Because
Yeah.
I think that's a big thing with our access deals is the money's pretty easy most of the time. I say that, I'm sure I'll get counters today that'll unhinge that. But for the most part, you can hone in pretty quickly on that. It's the scope of access, it's what is particular to them. We always call ahead and say, hey, we're going to send this over. What are some things we should know about? Like, what is something that's really particular to your league? Because we'll even though we're with the NFL, we'll do any sized leagues, and certain leagues have things they're really specific about that hasn't come up before, or brand relationships that function differently. Like America's Cup functions differently than the NBA, functions differently than the NHL. And so just kind of figuring that, letting them kind of tell you, but they don't necessarily know the problems that could arise, kind of thing. And so telling them what's normal and kind of walking them through that. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, so we'll talk about these issues in a lot more detail throughout the program, but do you want to preview some of the common legal landmines or pitfalls that come up in development through production and distribution of this sort of content? And how do you normally get past some of those issues?
So the biggest one, and this is one enough that my creatives have actually put it on a hat for me, is the concept of injunctive relief. which, just as a recap for people, that because most businesses, this isn't something that is fought over or could kill a project. The notion is when they go to a court, if there's a breach, with injunctive relief, they could prevent the show from being released. They could prevent it from happening. And that could happen after Netflix, Amazon, or something has spent tens of millions of dollars advertising it. And so the amount of exposure that Skydance would have if injunctive relief is granted is massive. It's way more than what the show would be worth, kind of thing. And that's the kind of exposure that we would never chance on a show. And it's something that traditionally isn't really a talking point in most other industries, because for us it's so absolutely a non-starter. It's just I've had projects with leagues die from that, where the league said we're not comfortable with that, and it's like, okay, well, we can't move forward. And that was on the scripted side, where it's a little more where it's more difficult to really kind of understand that, because the costs are so much more. A season of one episode of a scripted show could cost as much as a unscripted doc feature. And so the money is just way higher, but the risk is higher for the leagues. And so it's getting them comfortable with that notion. And the idea is they would not be able to prevent the show from being distributed, which is something we need and all of our network partners require. So that's one of the big ones that we get into all the time. And it's getting people comfortable. And that's an all hands on deck situation. It's not just BA, which is what I do. It's creative, it's executive level. Even the finance team can sometimes get involved, where it's like, look, this is what it is. And a large part of it is building the trust. Because with something like that, it is trust based for sure. You have to trust that what we're doing is aligned with what you ultimately want. Otherwise, why would you ever agree to that, right? And it's one of those things where if you deal with any level actor, any level talent in Hollywood, there's no question, no one fights you on that when you do when you're talking with WME or CAA. No one does that. It's when it's outside the realm. And part of it is getting them comfortable enough with the idea of they have to trust you when inherently you are on the other side of a deal trying to get your job done, and you're saying a bunch of things are non-negotiable. Well, you can't just say it's non-negotiable, you have to explain it. And so a big part of it is fleshing out that concept with them and getting them more comfortable with it. But I think that's one of the big ones. The other one's exclusivity issues sometimes we'll run into, where how much we can hold people off the market for certain things. Clearance for sports, it's mainly dealing with the leagues. Privacy, how we work with athletes during coverage of them or filming of them, what isn't off limits, where can they go? That's also really relationship based, but that's a big sticking point here as well. So those are kind of the big ones that we're going to hit on.
Yeah, I think the overarching thing is that when you're dealing with sports teams, sports leagues, and athletes, they just aren't familiar with the entertainment space and how much of it is really based on trust and relationship, right? Like Zach mentioned with the injunctive relief, that is not something that is really ever negotiated in an entertainment space. You know, every actor, all the A-list actors, all of the agents, they all know, like, yes, like we can get damages if someone breaches this contract. We just can't go to court and say, stop showing this film or TV show. And, you know, they sort of trust that whoever's making the movie is not going to do that, right? They sort of understand the practical implications that, it's in everyone's mutual interest that they're not going to do something to the actor that forces them to a place where they feel like they need that injunctive release. And so there's a lot of trust there. And, when you're moving into sports, it's a very new kind of uncharted world for especially these athletes who are very protective of, their name, image, and likeness, and thinking about how I control this part of myself is really how I make money. So if anything is shown that can hurt me reputationally or, negatively impact their image, like they want to be able to stop that. That's a very instinctive reaction. And so when it comes to injunctive relief and privacy, it's really building that trust. and, walking them through the practical implications of each of those provisions. And sometimes building that trust might be, hey, we're working on this larger deal behind the scenes, but in the meantime, do you just want to come and do a quick show with us, right? So that they get to know the creatives that we're working with, they get to know the style of the show, and then it gets them familiar with, hey, this is what it's like to be on a set, this is what it's like to be filmed, and this is the sort of input I have, right? And so that helps them get comfortable with that, because you can talk all day and say, it will be fine. We won't violate your privacy. If you feel really uncomfortable about something, you can say, I don't want to film that. And, the business people and the creative people can say that all day. But when you take them to a set and they get to sit through a show or be a part of something, and they see how that works in like actual reality, that can go a long way to making them comfortable with what they're being asked, and also building that trust, because what we said is what happens on set.
And the reputation, I think, because when I started at Skydance, Skydance had never done unscripted before. We'd done scripted a ton, and those were straightforward. But with unscripted, it's like getting people to trust you. And the big advantage Omaha has is they've got one of the biggest athletes ever there saying, like, no, you can trust us. Skydance, there is kind of it's the Hollywood executives kind of thing coming in. And over the years, it's gotten easier because I can say, hey, look at The Pig is In, Tarasi, like all of these other projects that are really well received, and the athletes are happy about them and the results and things along those lines. And then it makes it easier because they can then call, like for our Cowboys project, we talked to pretty much every cowboy. They could call them, have those conversations kind of thing, and better understand who we are and that you can trust us. And I think that's a big part of it, is just convincing them that we're not going to do harm, because it's not in our financial interest. And I think being a bigger company makes that more clear. We're not a company that's looking to do this one big project and this will identify our entire everything we do. It's no, if we have a project that goes really bad, it will impact the other 9 arms of this company kind of thing. And kind of explaining that sometimes I've seen success with that as well.
So it sounds like the operative word here is trust. So we're talking about the process of negotiating the access to athletes, coaches, leagues, and teams. So it sounds like for athletes and coaches, maybe that's still a trust factor, but do you still have the same experience when you're negotiating for access to a league or a team? Is it still purely trust-based?
Yeah, it is. It really is. And I think having the relationship, repeat business is much easier to do than new business. And I think that really tells you how much trust plays a part in it, where they run NFL teams are billion-dollar companies. NBA teams, most of them are billion-dollar companies, or a lot of them are. Like these are not flight by night people. And what's interesting is, and you'll see this, you can see this in scripted too, where it's like the people that ask for everything aren't the ones at the very top. It's the ones that are like 60% of the way towards the top, where they feel they need to fight because of how they value where they are in the pecking order. And they'll never say it. But I think that's similar too. So dealing with teams that have dealt with entertainment business for a while is easier than teams that have never dealt with entertainment. And so building that trust, having those lunches, anytime we work with a team or something like that, I try to go get lunches with them. Jennifer and I have had lunch kind of thing. It's building that because you're going to work with them again and again, and proving that you're trustworthy. You just need to prove to them that there's nothing to doubt. And so it's being transparent as much as you can and saying, this is what this is. And again, I think the critical mass plays a big part of it too, right? Where we've done projects with, I think, 6 NFL teams right now. And so the other ones could ask those teams. And my understanding is they all talk kind of, because if you're a GC at an NFL team, there's only 31 others of those that exist kind of thing. And so I think with teams, leagues, and leagues, it's a little different because they're so big that it really is kind of comes from the top down, and once someone at the top of the league kind of makes that decision, everyone just kind of needs to make it work. And it's more bogging through what their comfort level is. Because as a corporate attorney, there's always that you don't want to be the one that risks it big unless you explain it really clearly what's going on, right? And so part of our job is to give them the ammo so they can preserve themselves when they go to their company, because we're not going to change league policy. We're going to have to find a way to press ourselves against it and kind of bend it a little bit to fit where we need it to go. And we need them to trust that. And I think just having lunches with people hugely helps that. Letting them know that we're not just the way that media people are sometimes portrayed in the media, ironically. I think that's a big thing. So with leagues, with anyone, it is trust and reputation. And now our reputation is not much better. It exists now. We didn't really have one like 2, 3 years ago. And now it's very much, oh, Skydance Sports, you guys did this, or you worked with someone that knows this. Everyone knows each other in the sports legal community. And so you have to be aware of your reputation and your company's reputation in that.
Yeah, totally agree there. So let's talk about another challenge that often comes up with participants, exclusivity. So how do you get past exclusivity issues where either the production company or the network wants to hold this person for a certain period of time, or they have other shows or other projects that they want to do or are doing, whether it's with a brand or just other creative endeavors that they either want to do or continue to do? How do you navigate those issues to get a deal done?
Well, in a lot of ways, you know, at the end of the day, the exclusivity is driven by the network and sort of what they want. But you know, a lot of the times with these sports sort of programs, they understand that there's going to need to be some flexibility there. And so, especially if you're filming with athletes during the sports season, I think one of the obvious ones is that, of course, the show is going to come secondary to all of their obligations to the team and to the league, which, you know, if you're doing something that takes them behind the curtain, that, you know, works for us, right? Like working out a production schedule that they feel comfortable with in terms of, hey, they have these obligations, they have to show up to these practices, they have to show up to these games. And so at that point, we sort of coordinate with creative, the team, the athlete, what's workable for you? Where do you feel comfortable being filmed, and balancing that against, you know, what sort of narrative considerations are at play? And then, you know, as Zach mentioned, it's really having the conversation, because sometimes they don't even know the questions to ask. And it's really, you know, sometimes they'll ask a question and it's not really something that is pertinent to the deal, but it reveals an underlying concern. You're like, oh, that's not an issue here, but I can see like this is what you're concerned about. And so that gives us the chance to sort of walk them through their concerns, right? Because a lot of these athletes have their brand endorsement deals and they may be exclusive in one area or the next. And, you know, they're not familiar with Hollywood and the making of a television show, right? And so they're going to freak out and say, well, what if I'm going to be on screen and there's going to be XYZ brand, or, you know, I can't be involved with, you know, this type of category because that's, you know, it's tied up in an exclusivity. And really, it's just, yeah, you know, we can work through that. It's just about being transparent on both sides, right? You letting us know what sort of restrictions you have. And so that it gives us enough time to have that discussion with the network, have that discussion with creative, and make the adjustments that are necessary. And so having those sorts of conversations, right, also goes towards building the trust there and figuring out the exclusivity. And so a lot of it can seem really conflicting at first and complicated to work through, but I've found that when you just start having that conversation and getting to the root of the concerns, it makes it easier to have that discussion with the networks and the creatives.
Have you found, again, because I run into this every once in a while where we'll deal with someone so outside the industry that they'll just be like, oh, well, you can just do this, this, and this. And I'm like, you are greatly overestimating what we do, kind of thing, where a lot of the times they're like, oh, you're Skydance, you could just order this and do that. It's like, that's not how that works. And knowing that so much of it isn't, or I'll say no to something and they'll be like, oh, well, can't you make a thing? It's like, this is not a Zach Swartz problem or even a Skydance problem. This is a, if you don't agree to this, I can't sell to Netflix, Amazon, Paramount Plus, or any of these entities. So this is a big problem kind of thing. And knowing that, or being ping ponged back and forth. To me, this has happened more during production. I'm curious if this happens to you, where because they don't necessarily know what to flag during the initial deal, things come up and you'll get an angry call from a manager who you've never heard from before, and somehow they've gotten your number and be like, how could this have happened? I go, first of all, explain what has happened, because oftentimes we're not plugged into the minutia. We have production, at least for Skydance, we have production legal that handles more the day to day, and kind of then coming in and needing to solve things in real time where, oh, I'm sponsored by Clorox. You can't have Tide here, kind of thing. And it's like during the negotiation, there's no way we would have ever thought to ask, what is your preferred cleaning product brand sponsor? Like just something that would never think to ever ask that comes up. And then that's the other part of the job is solving that.
Yeah.
But have you run into that ping ponging thing where
Yeah, if I've done that at the deal stage, and they'll say like, well, hypothetically, I have a deal with Nike, right? Like it's the famous Michael Jordan problem at the Olympics, right? He had the Nike deal at the Olympic ceremony. He couldn't put on the Adidas tracksuit, right? And they delayed the ceremony until he was like, well, I'll unzip it and cover the Adidas logo, right? And so I think they don't think through those things, but that's also sort of walking them through the understanding of what a company will look at as an endorsement, because they'll often freak out. It's like, well, we're not going to ask you to physically wear the product or to endorse it. It might run as a commercial against the show and it might be appear in the background, but you don't need to have anything to do with that. And sometimes it's just making sure with the brand that, yeah, this is okay, and walking them through terms that I've dealt with in unscripted reality shows that we're familiar with, and we know what they mean in terms of like sponsorship integrations or commercial tie-in that feel really unfamiliar to athletes, right? It's even things like ownership of the results and proceeds, right? Like something that will freak them out. They're like, no, I own my NIL, and it's like, no, we're saying you own your name, image, and likeness, right? But we own the show. And that's one of those things you mentioned, Zach, right? Like there's no real way around it. The network oftentimes doesn't get to own the show that they're funding. They're like, why would we do this? It's industry norms. And it's really, again, walking them through that process and what it actually means for them.
And then leagues are great at it, by the way. Leagues will just send any deal we do with the NFL, they have a laundry list of these are our ads, our sponsors. Let the network know, kind of thing. And we'll get pushbacks from the networks, and this is when we get to turn to them and go like, well, this is the NFL. And they go, well, that's a really good point. And then and then we move off of it, kind of thing. But the branding's really interesting. And as what the future of that looks like too, where companies, like Dick's Sporting Goods has a production company. I don't think anyone would have thought about that 10 years ago, kind of thing, where these brands want to be more in the entertainment space. And I think it's kind of similar to in social media where there's the meme that occurs and then the brands all do the same thing, their version of it. I think this is kind of the next permutation of that, but I haven't seen it, what that will look like yet, and whether consumers will just say this is just a long ad for Popeyes, or whether it will be able to be fully integrated enough.
So a lot of these programs rely on existing content, archival footage owned by third parties. How can you talk about sort of the unique elements of clearing or obtaining rights to this type of third-party content?
Well, it's funny. We were talking about this before at some with Jen and I, and it's both of our companies are very much a let's go get it cleared kind of companies because of how much we work with the leagues. And it is really one of those things where you can't pay a league to use the footage in project A, B, and C, then decide in D, we don't want to. And then your E project, you're going to the league about a project. It's really kind of like preserving those relationships where the budget might suffer a little bit depending on the league, a lot bit, but it really is just kind of like clearing it is the best way to make sure there's no issues, both with the individual show and the bigger relationship, which I know in unscripted, sometimes people are like, well, isn't it journalism? It's like, yes, in that it's unscripted, but not a lot of our projects are that like hard. We're not making like CNN packages. We're making things for the streamers. And so it's knowing who our partners are, knowing who we work with a lot, and knowing the access. As the NFL moved more into Hollywood, it is getting more kind of what its IP is, right? Like it's actually really interesting once you start thinking of the leagues and teams as intellectual property, the same as you would a Star Wars or Marvel, where that's really what's going on. And I think knowing that and how because you would never make something with Disney footage without having a conversation with Disney, especially if that's something that you would want. Viewing the leagues more akin to that, I think is at least how Skydance approaches it.
Yeah, at Omaha, it's similar, right? We want to properly license all of the footage and archival materials that we're using. And I think that sort of consideration is very different if you're making a documentary that's akin to like Icarus or Armstrong Live, right? Where you're looking at your budget consideration, you're not looking to make a bunch of documentaries in the cycling space and it's just one-time footage, so you're going to fair use different pieces of it. And it's the same thing in Hollywood, right? Someone might risk fair using something from Disney for a one-time project, but at the end of the day, like we don't want to do that, right? We want to work with these leagues, we want to have relationships with them, and we recognize the value of the IP. And if you flip the script, right, whatever IP we have, we want to have a conversation about it and we want to have that value recognized. So of course, with the leagues, we're going to license it, and with the teams and everything, or whoever owns it will go to them and get that license. And long term, it works out better because we can use more footage and the quality is going to be better and we'll be able to get access to footage that we probably wouldn't, or not
Yeah.
probably, but footage we definitely wouldn't be able to fair use. So at the end of the day, from a financial perspective, yes, it can cost a lot of money, but I think it results in a better project and a better product, right? It gives us that sort of elevated project that we're looking for and bringing that sort of production value to these programs.
Yeah. And you kind of have it's the trust in the relationship, right? Where once you've done it enough with a league and included their footage, then if you go into a bit of a gray area, like we've had this with scripted side with the leagues. Because I handle scripted and unscripted, where this isn't where you're like, oh yeah, we're gonna tell everything how it is kind of thing. We are having writers creating things that are adjacent to your IP and it will change. And no, you cannot have approval over that because no showrunner in town will do that, right? So it's then, okay, but you trust us now. You've seen what we've done and kind of building it there kind of thing too. I think that's important with this as well.
Yeah, that actually brings us to one of my favorite issues, approvals. Can we
Yeah.
each take a moment and just talk about the type of approval request that you receive, to what extent you entertain them, and to the extent you're able to give approvals over various things, how does that change the creative of a show?
I think a lot of it, like if you're looking at working with a school to make a documentary or making a documentary that's very league focused, I think that's something that occurs in the creative and development stage, even before it gets to the deal making stage, right? When you're pitching a show, you need certain people on board, certain permissions on board, and you're pitching like, this is what the show is, right? It gets down to, are we doing something that is sports entertainment or is it investigative, right? And it's setting that expectation of what sort of show you're producing, what that will involve. There'll be questions asked at that level, right? So that when it gets to the deal making stage, it does make the approval process easier. And it also sort of informs what approvals they're asking for, because they're saying, hey, you're making this type of show. This is the type of approval that we need. But having said that, a lot of athletes want approval over everything.
Yeah.
They want final cut approval. They want approval and see all the footage of how they appear and how their storyline runs. And again, that's a bit of, hey, that's just not practical. A network is never going to agree to that, but this is how it's going to work when we're filming, right? Like we're not there every single day. And if there's something that you are uncomfortable with, let us know and we'll have that conversation. No one's, no one's ever going to sit there with a talent and say, hey, we're going to film you, even though you don't want to be filmed,
Yeah.
right? That's not good for the relationship. And that's a quick way to just lose talent right there. And so it's really making sure that everyone's on the same page about what sort of show we're making. And that's going to inform the creative and inform the approval process and inform who's going to agree to participate.
Yeah, for approvals with us, it's the temporalness of it, where it's, and this is always a tough thing to talk about because it is so fact dependent, but no one gets final cut as some kind of thing. I never want to say never because who knows what fact pattern could arise, but networks have it, right? And that's one of those things where it's like, yeah, we don't have that. I can't give you something we don't have, right? And then it's figuring out what their specific concerns are and how to address those specific concerns. Because if anyone says, I want approval over everything, it's like, well, no. What are your specific issues, right? Oh, I don't want people to see my leg. Okay. Now we can have a conversation, right? Figuring out what that looks like and where in the process that happens. I think that's more, I think when an approval right happens is as important as what the level of it is. Because, and again, I will say with scripted, it's way harder to give anything in that regard versus unscripted because it's not like you see a scene that got shot a week ago and you finally see it and you're like, I actually don't approve this. And it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have to go shoot that again. Like it's not unscripted where it's like, this is the footage we have, you have to figure this out, or we can work around it. And not every time you can. In scripted, it's next to impossible to work around that stuff. And so just because of the sheer cost. But again, it's relationship. I'm just gonna keep beating that drum.
Yeah, so we talked about this before, but maybe we can drill down on it a little bit more. So unique elements in right of publicity and privacy issues. A lot of this filming in these types of shows happen in locker rooms. They might involve medical treatment, involve elements of somebody's personal life. How do you balance that both as a lawyer contractually, but also as a relationship manager, if you will?
From a contractual standpoint, it's where the gray area is. I don't like doing access in my deals. I don't like doing access rights where every single delineation is spelled out and essentially it's a rule book for everyone. I've had counterparts who have wanted to do that, or deals that I've had where they're like, well, what happens if AB? And I'm like, we're not here to litigate the world and all of the permutations kind of thing. Because most shows don't have any issues, right? And so they say, well, what if they're changing in public? Can you film that? And it's like, well, why are they changing in public? Right? Like you kind of want to play in that space a little bit with them, but you don't want to get stuck playing hypotheticals with each other because the contracts can only be so long, right? And so I think just kind of walking them through the broadest approach and really, and Jennifer, I'm curious how you approach this too, because what I'll do is I'll encourage my creatives to have more calls with them. Where if it's something sensitive, I'm like, oh, I'll have my creative reach out and talk to them directly about that or something like that. So we don't have to figure out if this, then that rules kind of thing, because production does its best when it has the maximum amount of freedom. If they're constantly looking at a rule book, it's not going to be best for the show.
Yeah, it's really about balancing their hypotheticals, and then you have to kind of take them away from this like fear, this entire universe of everything that can happen, and really center them on, okay, realistically, like this is what we're filming. And for a lot of athletes, it's we just want to showcase a bit of your life off the field and how that relates to just your job as the athlete, right? That is their day-to-day job. And so things ancillary to that we may not be interested in, but it's, you know, you hear them out and sort of reframe what their concerns are and sort of set these realistic expectations of this is what we're actually filming.
Yeah.
And this is what we're planning to do. And this is the kind of show that we're doing. And it goes back to what Zach said earlier, right? Like 10, 15 years ago, it was a lot harder to say, trust us, because there wasn't this sort of entertainment sports programming. It was all investigative. It was this gotcha type thing. And when you heard unscripted or reality TV, we think of the reality TV shows where there are these gotcha moments and people don't come off to audiences in the best light, right? But now people, more and more people are comfortable with the type of content. And so you can say, hey, this is like Quarterback, this is like Drive to Survive. And they can look at that and get a sense of, okay, this worked out. This is how they were portrayed. And so I'm comfortable with this. You know, and but having said that, there is a little bit more of like, okay, we agree that we won't film you where you have a reasonable expectation of privacy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like we'll acknowledge that. We all know, you know, that won't happen. But you know, a lot of talent who come from a sports world, you know, they want that sort of language in writing to make them comfortable. And you know, legally, like we're not going to break the law and do something like that. And, you know, making sure that at each stage they at least consent to the filming, because on the ground, that's gives them a bit of control over what is filmed and what's not filmed.
Yeah, one of the things I like doing too, and I'm curious, Jen, if you've done this, is giving them things that are absolutely never going to happen. Where it's just like, okay, but if he's on a boat, he needs this, this, and this. And I'm like, this is about a track star. Sure, you could have boat approval, right? And it's not
Yeah.
like it's
It's
not
like,
being dismissive. It's more just like if this is genuinely concerned, and my creatives have explicitly told me this is not a concern, those little things to like keep the
we'll
change
put it in
going.
writing, right?
Yeah,
And address that.
exactly.
Because even though like we would never do that, if you say no to them, they're like, well, why?
Yeah.
Like if it's really not a concern, why wouldn't you put that? So, you know, we'll agree, like we won't defame somebody.
Yeah, yeah,
Right?
sure. We
Like that.
won't. Yeah, it's and I bring this up sometimes, and I use it more on the sports leagues player side. Is the entertainment industry is a industry of mutually assured destruction, and I think Jen, you said this on one of our calls too. Using that phrase where it's like if you bite someone badly, everyone will know that, and that will, it doesn't matter how much goodwill you have, that will be what people know of you, kind of thing. And I don't believe that's how the sports industry works. It's very much you're able to bite people and keep moving. The entertainment industry really can't get away with that, especially in a group like with sports or athletes, because they all talk. And the people that talk the most are the ones that have the worst experience. People
It's
don't,
a small world.
yeah, it's like Yelp reviews are all fives and ones. That's how that works with negotiation as well.
Yeah, great analogy. So moving from players and on-camera participants to leagues, can you talk about how collective bargaining agreements or how that impacts what you're doing with this type of programming vis-a-vis leagues?
I think the one in particular I can think of, there's a certain league, I won't get into them specifically, but they have specific requirements if you hit a certain number of players. So if there's three of these league players, then the league needs approved, or the union for the league needs to be approve it, which is fine, but it's just now it's adding that extra layer of filters and things to go through. I think each league has its quirks. I'll be honest, I have not read all of the CBAs. I've read a few of them. I've skimmed most of them, but that's not really our scope. I really need the league's lawyers to tell me that. And Jenna, I'm curious if you've run into this where they will wait until later into the negotiation to go, oh yeah, well that's against our bylaws and those are unmovable. And it's like, well, why is this now coming up, kind of thing. And I think it's the patience to let them figure it out too. Because again, a lot of these are people that went big law, went into the leagues, have a great job, don't work across entertainment, or every once in a while, one of the leagues will bring in someone that works internally that worked at an internship at a studio 25 years ago, and then they will double down on being like, no, 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 but I know what I'm doing. And then you have to kind of like unwind that aspect with working with a league where it's like, you can't tell them the person that you're working with is wrong because then they get defensive, right? I think that's you really got to trust the leagues to guide you on that regard. But we've reviewed on our end how media portrayals work for the leagues and things like that, so we know roughly the pitfalls. But we're not experts at CBAs, or I'm not. I don't know
Yeah,
if you
not
guys
an
are.
well, at the end of the day, right? It's well, what their rules are, we have to enable the athletes to comply with them, right? Like again, mutually assured destruction. It's not in our interest to put an athlete in a position where, hey, I've got to violate my CBA in order to participate in your project. That makes no one happy.
Yeah.
And so when those issues comes up, like we'll broadly agree to comply with what sort of union regulations are out there, what sort of federal laws are out there. And then, when the rubber meets the road and there's a little bit of tension between, the reality of what a network will require and what any sort of union rules are in existence, again, it's a conversation. You rely on their guidance and you sort of figure it out and make adjustments as needed. And hopefully those adjustments aren't too painful. But I think, again, at the end of the day, everybody wants to get their show made. And if you have a conversation with the network and say like, hey, this is where our hands are tied and this is what we have to do, everyone will work together to find that solution.
Yeah.
So programming at the collegiate level, so audiovisual works around college athletics have become pretty popular recently, especially with changes in NIL rules. Can you talk about any unique challenges that you have with dealing with universities or college athletes generally?
I, I think it's the same issues as dealing with professional athletes, except they don't have the same money. And they're more, I found with college athletes, they're more aware of their brand. I mean, obviously, when you get into the big athletes, they are, but smaller athletes are living and dying by them essentially. And that's kind of, and they're younger, right? And maybe it's their uncle representing them, not and by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know what their uncle does, right? But very rarely are they an entertainment lawyer. So I think the bigger hurdle, not issue, is the schools because the schools are not making the money they would have prior, where before, if you wanted all access to a college team, you just need to make a deal with the school. The school handles it with the athletes. We saw this in real time with one of our shows where one of our offers was that, and then it had to change. And that show didn't move forward, but then we had to make deals with individual athletes, and that becomes much harder because they might, because if you think bringing an athlete in to understand what their value is while they're millionaires, it's much harder when it's an athlete who's not a millionaire, who doesn't understand what their value is and thinks that, oh, I should be paid $1 million an episode. It's like, okay, but the all pro version of you doesn't get that. I don't know why you should, kind of thing. And figuring that out and what makes sense, right? Because college football isn't as big as the NFL. So an NFL doc would sell more than a college football doc. Now, again, variability depending on which doc is on, but I think the value proposition then is a little harder.
Yeah, I agree, especially with a lot of college athletes, right? They are coming into sports in a very different environment, right? These pro football players come from a background of playing college football where a school controlled their name, image, and likeness. And, when you're asking them to be a part of a show, they definitely want their money and they want that money and pay to reflect their value. But at the end of the day, if they're playing, like if they're a major player, star player on an NFL team, part of their consideration is like, my main job is to play on this team. And if you don't meet my demands, I can sort of take it or leave it. That money isn't make or break for them, right? And so they approach what they want out of the show through that lens. Whereas, college athletes, again, they're considering what is my value as a player? What is my value as a personal brand? But this could mean a lot to them. And they understand that if I do well this season and someone happens to be following me and putting this in a television show, that could like make or break me. They're looking at people like Livy Dunn, right?
Oh,
Who have
yeah.
been able to monetize their personal brand. And that's what they're looking to do. So that great if their athletic career succeeds, but they're also thinking, well, let me also build this alternative revenue source if the athletic career isn't as lucrative. And, Zach, I don't know if you had this, but I have had athletes in this conversation. They want the reassurance of, look, we're paying you this much, not even our pro players get that much, right? Like having that sort of conversation and, putting them in contact, putting their pay in context.
Yeah,
It can be
because you
really
have to,
helpful.
right?
Right.
But again, it's that hard thing with actors, right? Where it's like once you start comparing them, you don't know how they value the person you're talking about, and they could then see that as a total insult. Which is why for athletes, I'll say Peyton Manning, because it's like internally we have Tom Cruise, right? Like if I say, oh, that's not something Tom Cruise has, guess what, people? Like there's that benchmark. So getting those big deals is super important too. The like benchmark ones.
So we're up against on time. We have to cut this short a little bit. I'd be remiss if we didn't go over just a couple questions from the chat. Some of these could be a panel in and of themselves, so we don't have time to do that, but maybe just one or two if you'll indulge a couple more minutes. So further to what you were just talking about, have you found it easier or more difficult to negotiate with small market teams versus big market, or small developing league versus well-established strong arm type leagues?
I think it really depends on the type of show you're trying to make. And it's really recognizing, like, if you're working with a large sports league, you're not going to go to them and say, hey, this is a chance to make a show that's going to bring you to a larger audience, right? It's a different conversation, but you will say that to something that is a smaller league and the type of show, right? If you go to, like, we did lacrosse with Rebels Places, right? An element of that was giving a history of lacrosse and explaining lacrosse to the audience because it is not as popular of a show versus, like, if you're going to a league, like, you don't need to explain the history of the NFL or how that football is played to the general audience, right? And so it's really making sure that you are actually taking into consideration the partner that you're working with.
I think big league, I think that's exactly right. I think big leagues, it's easy to know whether a deal will make or not pretty quickly. Just if you pitch it to them and they just say, no, that's not feasible kind of thing. Little leagues, they can be a little more defensive about things and kind of draw it out more. Uh, yeah, it's completely project dependent. But I like small leagues. I like working with small leagues because it's kind of like startup energy a little bit, but not in a toxic way.
Like when you get the really enthusiastic ones.
Yeah, when they're just
They're like,
excited to be there.
whatever we
Yeah,
can do to
yeah,
help you
yeah,
make
yeah.
this show, we will like help you smooth over any bumps in the road and things like that, right? Because they don't really have that, their IP doesn't really yet have that sort of public perception yet. And so it's a
Yeah.
chance for them to build it through the show.
When it's funny when small leagues then dramatically overplay their hand, where they're like, this is going to be the most premier intergender volleyball, mud volleyball league this side of the Mississippi. And it's just like,
And
I
everyone's
hear
gonna
you,
watch it and it's
but
gonna be great.
I don't know what the value of that. Like, you're not quantifying it in a way that makes sense to us, kind of thing. Or I don't know if that exists specifically, but we have dealt with very small leagues that are dramatically overvaluing it, kind of thing.
So to wrap this up, we sort of talked about trust being very important, injunctive relief and approval sometimes being a big hurdle in this space. If there was one thing that you would want your counterparts that you deal with on a daily basis to know, or something to change in this space, just one, what would those things be?
Agree to no injunctive relief.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, that's such a sticking point, really. It
Yeah.
can really hold up a deal.
I completely agree. And by the way, I wasn't kidding. I literally have an injunctive relief hat because it is that much of a talking point with teams and leagues and stuff. Because like Jennifer, I assume you have the same thing where we don't have cards that say what to say, but with certain questions, like I know how to respond to that. With injunctive relief, it's like, I didn't, before I did Unscripted, I never had a response to that because it's like, no, why would we? And then you just have to learn and walk them through it. But I think trusting us enough on that point, and the thing I would pick also, because I'm going to say Jennifer picked that one, is when you hire entertainment lawyers where that they've actually done what they're doing. Because I've dealt a number of times where people have hired, this is no offense to any music lawyers, you wouldn't hire me to represent a music deal. This with television, especially scripted, it is much easier when you have someone that has done it because of the injunctive relief. It's the quickest way to know, honestly. If they fight on injunctive relief, they have not been in this space.
And it's helpful to the other side, right? Because you have someone that is on
Totally.
your team
Yeah,
give you the explanation. They might give the same explanation that we give, but we're on the other side of the deal, right? And there's more
exactly.
trust if the person that is representing you is explaining that to you and backing up what we're saying.
Yeah. Because it's just the case. And it's so unfortunate because I'm just like, you just have to believe me or don't, but I'll give you a list of lawyers you can call, kind of thing. But yeah, I think injunctive relief is the big one.
Yeah, I don't even know how many hours we've spent talking
Yeah.
about injunctive relief.
Even just the three of us.
Yes,
Yeah.
in our spare time.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us. This has been a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do a lot more of these. Appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Perfect. Thank you guys.
Thank you.